Hello, I am Anita Belle, a candidate for President of the United States, and we're about to have a very hard conversation about reparations and the 13th Amendment. Um, what I'm about to tell you is controversial and emotional. It's emotional and traumatizing for me too. And yet, this is what we have avoided for 154 years. I think we have moved past some of the emotions of the Civil War, that we're able to have a very frank and honest conversation right now. I think we've grown up a little bit as a nation, and it's time to have the talk. So, uh, for those who, I just wanted to warn you, this is going to be a little bit difficult, but if you need more information about the topic, feel free to refer to my book, Revealing Mistaken Identities. It's available now on Amazon.com at the link that I have displayed here. Let me begin by truthfully disclosing that I'm not a member of the Masons, Eastern Stars, any other secret society or shadow government, a sorority or fraternity. Well, Nita, how are you going to be a member of a fraternity or the Masons if you're a woman? Well, just in case anybody wonders, all right, women can't be or members of certain organizations. I do identify as a woman. My pronouns are she and hers, and that's what's on my birth certificate. So that's how I identify. But just in case anybody had a question about a loophole, I have not taken an oath upon pain of death to keep certain secrets. That's important because we're about to talk about a very distinct rabbit hole. And I love this scene from The Matrix. It talks about a rabbit hole in general, but I'm about to take you down a Masonic rabbit hole. But just look at this scene and take a picture in your mind about what it's like to have been given a blue pill and put basically asleep, and then finally have the choice of taking the red pill. Just watch.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Like the character Morpheus said, all I'm offering you is the truth, nothing more. What I did by disclosing my non-affiliation with any Masonic organization or secret society was adopt a practice that's being implemented over in England, wherein candidates, politicians, even journalists disclose whether or not they are a member of a Masonic organization. This is an effort to promote transparency so that people who are not members of these organizations won't feel that they are the subject of any bias, whether in court or any other proceeding, a subject of bias against them because they are not members of this particular organization. So I'm adopting that because the United States is very Masonic. It's a Masonic nation. Now, there are going to be those who dispute that, but the proof is right here in the architecture, uh, right here, hidden in plain sight. So we could debate it a little bit, but I won't go into that. I won't belabor the point. The architecture, especially the Washington Monument, is based upon an Egyptian prophecy, or some people would want to say myth. Um, in Egypt, the land itself called itself Kemet. So the people in the land called it Kemet. And it's a part of Africa. Some people want to say it's part of the Middle East, but it's a part of that Middle East that's due north of the Sudan and Ethiopia and nations such as that. We know those nations are black, and ancient Egypt was very black. Anyway, this story from ancient Egypt uh, talked about Osar, Oset, and Haru. Osar, who the Greeks called Osiris, Aset, who the Greeks called Isis, and Haru, who the Greeks called um, Horus. So, in this particular story, the villain Set castrated his brother Osar, and Set is also sometimes called Seth, depending on your pronunciation, and also your various. You have various dialects. So, in this particular story, the phallus that was castrated was resurrected by Aset, and that's a beautiful symbol over there as the obelisk. The Greeks called it the obelisk, and it's called the tikkun in the language of Kemet, and um, this is the picture that you see here, that the Washington Monument is based upon that Egyptian story and principle about the obelisk. George Washington being a Mason and the Washington Monument being one huge um, Egyptian symbol. So that's just the Washington Monument. Also pictured here is the Masonic Temple in Detroit. I'm in Detroit, Michigan, and Detroit happens to be the home of the largest Masonic temple in the whole world. So just the architecture is proof that of the power of this particular organization, and it still exists to this day, just like it did in 1776 with George Washington becoming the first president. So let's look at the Masons just a little bit, because they are harboring some secrets, and we want to face it and let God grace it. So they might take an oath among themselves to keep their secrets, but since I'm not in the organization, I'm not bound by that oath. And it is true that, of course, what you don't know will hurt you. And this is not one case where ignorance is bliss. It is very, very dangerous. So I wanted to make you aware of what's going on. According to the internet and various sites on the internet, in order to be a Freemason, you had to be a male. I don't know if that's biological male or if you can have surgery. Uh, I'm just saying what the basic rules are. You had to be a male. You had to be age 21 or older. I don't know if it's been decreased now to 18, but the main one that I wanted to hone in and focus in on was that you had to be free born. This is the contention. This is what causes separate and unequal in Freemasonry, and then that extends and spills outside of the Masonic Temple into the streets of Detroit and various other places. So, separate and unequal based upon whether or not a person is freeborn. The invalidity of the 13th Amendment is a secret that the Masons don't want you to know. Why? Well, because there were certain white Masons who didn't want to accept Black Masons as their brothers or as equals. So, in order to do that, they had to defeat the qualifications for becoming a Mason. One of those qualifications being freeborn. Therefore, it behooved those certain white Masons, and let's just be honest, the Ku Klux Klan was born from Freemasonry. These Klan member and maybe not so Klan member members of the White Masons therefore decided that we have to perpetuate slavery in one form or another, perhaps secretly. Why do I say that? Well, it had to be a bit of a secret and a bit of a shock because Abraham Lincoln, as far as I know, was not a member of the Masonic fraternity. Um, what he did, of course, as part of his war powers during the Civil War as Commander in Chief and President of the United States, was enact the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared that any enslaved persons in the rebellious states, the 11 rebellious states that succeeded, would henceforth be free from slavery. Okay, fine. That's what he was able to do under his war powers for the rebellious states. However, for those states that were in the Union, and of course, when the Union was being restored and the 11 states were no longer seceding, they surrendered and returned, then that meant in order to end slavery in all of the United States, a constitutional amendment had to be enacted. Now, the war between the states, or the Civil War, ended officially on April 9th, 1865. And Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. He was shot on April 14th and died from his wounds on April 15th, 1865. That's another long story. But let's just look at what happened with the amending of the Constitution, which occurred before the Civil War ended. How do you amend the Constitution? Well, according to Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, there are two stages to amending the Constitution. The first stage being the proposal stage, the second stage being the ratification stage. Within the proposal stage, there are two methods or alternatives for being able to propose an amendment. And those two methods, one has never been used, but I'll mention it, and that would be going to 2/3 of the state legislatures and having them pass the proposed amendment. Well, you can imagine that's a lot of work. So the type of method that's most often and heretofore has always been used is the method of going to 2/3 of both houses of Congress and having them pass the proposed amendment. Now, the Civil War and Reconstruction after the Civil War was a period of time of, for lack of a better word, a flaming hot mess. So there's nothing else to call it. I mean, that was a time period. I have an ancestor, a cousin who became the first black senator from the state of Mississippi, but it was all during Reconstruction. Hiram Revels, if you want to know his name, was the first black senator from the state of Mississippi, one of my cousins. Okay, fine. But he only served one term, and part of that could have been because of all of the drama going on down in Mississippi and elsewhere during Reconstruction, between carpetbagging and other corruption, and just the whole idea of how are we going to keep this union together. So what the United States Supreme Court has said when challenges to various decisions and amendments arose was that they said certain things are non-justiciable, meaning they're not going to hear it. So when it came to the ratification stage of the proposed constitutional amendments that were adopted, the U.S. Supreme Court said, we're not going to touch this, non-justiciable. We're not looking at the ratification stage. However, the U.S. Supreme Court did agree that they had jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and the power to look over the proposal stage and whether or not the proposal stage was enacted according to the U.S. Constitution, whether or not it was constitutional. So what we're going to hone in on, have the hard conversation on, is the proposal stage of the 13th Amendment. All right, let's look at the proposal stage of the 13th Amendment in the U.S. Senate. First of all, you need to know what they were voting on. This is the language of the proposed 13th Amendment that we're discussing. It says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. All right. This proposal is the same language as the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance governed states in the Northwest Territory. Those states, they were territories. Now they're called states. But those states included a place like Michigan, and that was to make a balance between free states and slave states, so that the Michigan and the Northwest Territory, Northwest Ordinance being those free states where there was never slavery. This is important because that's where I'm from, Michigan. All right, let's look at the vote. The proposed 13th Amendment in the U.S. Senate on April the 8th, 1864. This was still during the Civil War. The Civil War started in 1861. It did not end until April the 9th, 1865. So this particular amendment was proposed during the Civil War, and that is problematic. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But on April the 8th, 1864, the vote for the proposed 13th Amendment in the Senate was 38 to 6. This means that at least, and I say at least, 2 senators were either absent or abstained. Now, why is that a problem? Let's look at what the Constitution says about the U.S. Senate. Each state has 2 senators. That was the compromise, that states would each have 2 senators, and that would be the Senate. Okay. On April the 8th, 1864, the United States consisted of 34 states. There were other territories, but 34 actual states. Now, of those 34 states, there were 11 states that were in the rebellion, part of the secession, and so they weren't there. Now, if you're not counting those 11 states, and if you're not counting the 22 senators from those 11 states that succeeded, then you have 23 remaining states, each represented by 2 senators, for a total of 46 senators. All right. If you take the 2/3 based upon the total of 46 senators, then 2/3 of 46 is 31. There were 38 votes in favor, 6 votes opposed. Then that meant that's more than 31. The measure passes. But wait a minute. What if you do count the 22 senators from the 11 states that are part of the rebellion? What if you do count them? That means out of 34 states, then the actual total that we should be basing the 2/3 on is not 46, but the total should be 68. Now, because 22 senators are not there, we don't know what their vote is. It could be yes or no. We're assuming no because that's part of what they were fighting about. But you also have, out of that 2/3, what would be 2/3 of 68? That would be 46. You would have enough votes to make the 13th Amendment be valid if it had passed the Senate with all 46 of those senators voting in favor of the 13th Amendment as it was proposed. But you didn't have a unanimous vote on April the 8th, 1864. You had 38 in favor, 6 voted no, and 2 of them, we don't know where they are. So we don't have a total 46 to make it unanimous. Now, why does it matter? Because there is a rebellion going on. So why does it matter? Why do we have to count those senators? I'm saying we have to count those senators from the rebelling states. Because in Article 5, the same portion of the Constitution that defines how you amend it also said that no state can be deprived of representation in the Senate. So if no state can be deprived of representation in the Senate, then you have to count those 22 senators, even though they're not there. They're part of the denominator. They just aren't part of the numerator. So the denominator should be based on 68 instead of based on 44. Then 2/3 of 68 would be 46, and that meant those 46 senators who were there had to vote for it unanimously. Because they did not, I say it's a hard conversation. I like saying slavery still exists in the United States? Look at me. Do I look like I'm enjoying telling you this? But this is the truth, hard as it may be. And we can't keep it a secret, because a secret in the wrong hands will become a weapon. So we have to fix it. Let the secret be revealed and fix it. Fix it, because this is what's broken in America. Race is broken in America, but there is no place in the Constitution that said the slaves had to be black. The Irish know this because they came over as indentured servants, and there were other people. There were a few British people who came over as indentured servants too. And indentured servitude usually ends after a period of time, but this lack of a constitutional amendment means the indentured servitude can go on in perpetuity, which is called slavery. All right, we have to fix this. It's not just about race, but the race that was wronged needs to be righted. And when we do the right thing, it will also inure for righting everybody else. 13th Amendment was voted for the second time in the House of Representatives on January 31st, 1865. Mind you, the Civil War was still going on. It didn't end until April the 9th, 1865. So we're talking about January, end of January. Matter of fact, it was a hot mess and contentious even among the states that didn't rebel, that were still in the Union, because it didn't pass the first time. It went before the House of Representatives. So Lincoln did some politicking, and it was supposed to pass the second time. So here's what happened. On January 31st in 1865, by that time, America had 36 states. Mind you, 36 states total, because we're fighting a war, because you can't just up and leave. So those 11 states that succeeded, were they there? Were they not there? Anyway, let's just say they were supposed to be there and they weren't there. Anyway, 36 minus 11 leaves 25 states. Now, of those 25 states, the House of Representatives is not like the Senate. So you don't have just 2. Mind you, there's not even a law in the Constitution that says that a state must have representation in the House of Representatives. So there's not a constitutional provision for the House as there is for the Senate. So even if those 11 states weren't there, oh well. But here is what happened. Of those remaining 25 states, the vote on the 13th Amendment on January 31st, 1865 was 119 yeas, 56 nays, and then 8 people did not vote. Of those 8 people who did not vote, 2 we know were absent because they had excused absences. So there were 6 people who, for lack of a better word, were abstaining. They didn't vote. And even though the Constitution says there's supposed to be some kind of, you're supposed to vote, they didn't vote. So let's look at it. 119 plus 56. If you say that the fraction for the 2/3 is the total of 175 people who did vote, then 2/3 of 175 is 117. Since 119 voted yes for the proposed constitutional amendment, then it passed the House. However, what if the denominator for the 2/3 fraction is not just the yeas and the nays, but you have to count the people abstaining? Because there got to a point in Congress where there were more people abstaining than there were voting, and it didn't even reach a quorum. Well, you have a quorum, Anita, but you still count them for the quorum. You still count the yeas, the nays, and then the abstentions. At least that's how Congress started doing it, but on that day, they didn't do it. So 119 yeas, 56 nays, and 6 abstentions makes a fraction of 181. 2/3 of 181 rounded up because there's whole people, even though there's partial numbers. Whole number would be 121. If only 119 voted yay and not 121, then in the House, the proposed constitutional amendment failed for lack of 2 votes. So, what am I saying? That both in the House and in the Senate, the proposed 13th Amendment did not pass. Now, it doesn't matter if you sent them to the states, it's Reconstruction, and the reconstruction of these state legislatures with all of the election rigging that was going on, it made sure the legislatures passed the 13th Amendment so that now it's ratified, and then you send it up to the Secretary of State and it gets adopted, and now it's a part of the Constitution. But this is what was going on in 1864 and 1865. And it's time now in 2019 to look at this and fix it. The root word for reparations is to repair. We need to repair not just the blacks who were damaged by slavery, but the entire country that was torn apart in the Civil War. We have to repair the nation from what happened during the Civil War so we don't have another Civil War over race again. Does the proposed 13th Amendment have a statute of limitations or a deadline? So is time up? Has our window of opportunity passed? No. Why do I say no? Because Mississippi, the state where my family is from, just passed the 13th Amendment. They just ratified it in 1995. But even when they ratified it in 1995, they didn't send it to the Secretary of State for the nation. So it didn't get adopted that Mississippi ratified the 13th Amendment until 2013. So they waited a little bit. A little bit. So that's Mississippi. But and that just shows that there are some white Ku Klux Klan members of the Masons that will keep it going and keep going and going because they don't want to accept blacks as equals. So if you're a slave and they're free, you're not equal. So, and you aren't qualified to be in Freemasonry and all the so-called benefits of being part of that brotherhood and sisterhood. So I'm just saying what Congress can and should do to shore up any ambiguity, to repair the nation and not just black people, is vote again on the Civil War amendments of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. You see, there's similar flaws in the invalidity of the 14th and 15th Amendment. That's another video. It's painful to talk about this. It's painful, especially as an African American. If I wasn't in Michigan, imagine if I was still in Mississippi, I would have to wonder if they hadn't changed the state law, would somebody be trying to put some shackles on me again? There is no state law in Florida and Texas that outlaws slavery. It's completely dependent upon federal law. But if the federal law is invalid, then what can they try and do in Florida or Texas? We need to fix this. We need to fix it before a president or anyone else decides to take advantage of these flaws and loopholes to their benefit, to promote their agenda. We need to also recognize, because there is a flaw with the 14th Amendment's validity, again, going to what happened in the U.S. Senate, that, and that's in regards to denying, even though it's after the Civil War, and they still denied a seat to a U.S. Senator from New Jersey, part of the Union, but denied this person a seat. So does that make the vote for the 13th Amendment valid? Because he was going to vote against it. And that's the 14th Amendment. And he's from New Jersey, and New Jersey didn't succeed. They were part of the Union. And yet he was going to vote against the 14th Amendment. And he was denied his seat, and it wound up passing. And that person, that senator's name was John P. Stockton. That's the 14th Amendment. I don't even have time at the moment to go into the 15th Amendment. So let's just look at this. If you say the 13th is invalid, if you say, well, it's invalid under federal law, so we go back to revert back to state law and look at what the state law says. If you say the 14th Amendment is invalid, then there goes birthright citizenship, but not just for people of African descent. That goes away for everybody. It's a huge problem, because if it goes away for everybody, that what the U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about citizenship. Citizenship was something that was reserved to the states. So how do you become a citizen of the United States without a 14th Amendment? And we're getting ready to have a federal election for a federal office. Now, you could run for governor of Michigan, and even the Michigan Constitution, because I reviewed it very quickly, says that you have to be a citizen of the United States to be an officer like a governor or any elected official. Okay, fine. But now, where is American citizenship if the 14th Amendment is invalid? This is why the Masons keep it a secret, because it's a big problem, but not just on the federal level, but on a state level as well. So it renders people of African descent stateless, but everybody else could be stateless as well. The other thing that could happen is that, please, Steve, please stop pretending everything is okay. The status quo of we outlawed slavery in 1865, that is fake news. NORAD broadcasts on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day about Santa Claus going to various nations delivering packages. Fake news. But they do that for the children. I don't know why we authorize and sanction lying to our children, but this is just more fake news. Sorry, Donald Trump was right. And you know I don't say that very often. And I regret saying that right now. This is fake news. It does not it's not true. It's not true yet. And so we have to fix this, especially because there is now a United Nations and we're players on a world stage. We even host the United Nations in New York. It's embarrassing. It's downright embarrassing that we go around the world promoting human rights and civil rights, and here we have this big glaring we have this big glaring mark on us. So you have to understand, part of how I discovered this is when I was suing the CIA and saying, well, the CIA putting drugs in the Black community causes not just a violation of civil rights, it's not just a ploy to commit genocide by mass incarceration and mass drug addiction. It's also violating the 13th Amendment. But when I did this research, I found that if the 13th Amendment isn't valid, that was their loophole, and it still is their loophole. They can still bring in drugs and enslave not just people of African descent, because the Constitution did not limit slavery to just people who are from Africa. So now you can bring in drugs, and if some of it gets into the white community and you have a few addicts overdosing, that's just collateral damage. We have to fix this for so many reasons. If we're talking about human trafficking coming across the border, we have to fix it, not by closing the border, but by fixing the 13th Amendment. Pretending everything is okay is the blue pill that helps modern day Blacks pretend that they are freeborn so that they can be accepted by white Masons. And it also allows the government to continue to pretend if everything's okay and we actually have the right to rule. Without the birthright citizenship, our government is de jure but not de facto. Without citizenship, who is running the government? I guess the Democratic Party can just pick their favorites and say, well, you go and rule, you go and rule. They can rig an election in favor of Hillary instead of Bernie because they're a private corporation. And a private corporation can then just decide, because we are all equally unqualified to be president or any other office if we are not citizens of the United States, because the 14th Amendment is invalid. We have to fix this, but while we're fixing it, put in reparations, because that is the root word. We are repairing. We're repairing our nation. We have some people, and I'm sure the Black politicians will give me the most grief, and I really am not looking forward to it, but I know I'm going to get some from white politicians and judges as well, saying that, but this puts all of us as a country at long-term risk for the short-term gain of keeping a job, our government job. Mind you, I have a law degree, but I drive for Lyft. It would be a massive upward mobility promotion for me to go from Lyft to President of the United States. Yeah, I want the job, but I want it right. I want it right. That's why I'm bringing this to you, but where are your career politicians? For 154 years, nobody mentioned it. A disbarred attorney does. Maybe that's why I got disbarred. Anyway, this means I'm not qualified to be president because I'm not an actual citizen. But now, which one of the presidential candidates are actual citizens? Aren't we all equally disqualified? I don't care if you've been a senator or a vice president or a secretary of some governmental department. If you had to be a U.S. citizen and you're covering up that the 14th Amendment is not valid, goodness, what act of office did you commit? You could commit high crimes and misdemeanors, or you could have been doing everything right. But how could even your acts in office be valid if the people committing those acts were violating the Constitution? We need to fix this before the next election. We need to fix it in 2019 so we can have an election in 2020. But this also explains why some Black Masons are trying to usurp and take over the reparations dialogue. You'll have reparations activists like me who are non-Masons who are bringing up these very controversial, hard to hear, and it hurts. It's just hard to talk about this. It's traumatic, but we have to be whole. You have to sometimes go through some pain to become whole. So we have to make this particular sacrifice in order for us to ultimately be free. That we don't have to look over our shoulder and be afraid of anyone taking our freedom away. Because if we don't bring this up, then we're risking the chance of someone else doing so. And heaven help us then. Reparations is a love story, not just a love story between Osset or Isis and Osiris. It's a love story about America, because I have to love America a little teensy bit in order to even bring this up. I could easily stay on the sidelines and eat popcorn, but I'm looking at the law of correspondence as it comes to our people. The law of correspondence from Egypt or Kemet, you know part of it, but as above, so below. But I'm going to submit this one. If we want to free the ones on the inside of the prisons, then we have to free the ones on the outside wearing the aprons. We have to do it. This frees them from a grand master who is using a form of blackmail, saying, well, you know what? We all know the 13th Amendment is invalid. And I'm going to bring that up and fight for you all to go back into full-fledged slavery. But I won't do it if you do X. And then they wind up selling us out. Or if you do Y and they sell us out a little bit more until they make themselves, the ones wearing the aprons, make themselves slaves on the outside, just like the ones wearing the chains are the slaves on the inside. It's time to free these Black men from the blackmail. So let's review really quickly. Risk of my not blowing the whistle on the 13th, 14th Amendments as part of a run for president. What are the risks? This means we revert back to the laws of 50 different states. Mind you, these state laws were created thinking that the federal law was valid. So some state laws have gaps where they don't define citizenship based upon state law. They just deferred to the federal government. Then what is a citizen under Michigan law? I'm in Michigan. It's undefined because they didn't have to define it because the citizenship was decided by the 14th Amendment. Oh, well, now how do we define it? Now, depending on your state, people in Florida and Texas, hear me, slavery could be reenacted. People in states that say, well, we base our law on abolition of slavery upon the federal law, you better need to be thinking about getting out too. And And when we're talking about, oh, do I have to relocate just so I could be safe and my children be safe? Really think about it. If we're going back to 1859, before Abraham Lincoln, before the Civil War, then the U.S. Constitution permitted the Fugitive Slave Act, meaning if you came to Michigan, as many people did on the Underground Railroad, they could be arrested and taken back to the slaveholding state, even though Michigan was a free state. And that's why Detroit was a part of the Underground Railroad, right there on the border with Canada. All you had to do was cross the river and you go over to Canada, where slavery was completely outlawed. It's a different country and they couldn't come and get you. Well, we don't know what extradition would permit right now, but that's one of the, we're going back in time if we don't fix this. Do we want to go back? Do we want that kind of time travel? Next, birthright citizenship becomes revoked. And this affects immigration, particularly people coming from Mexico, Central America, and South America. Birthright citizenship. But anybody who thought, well, if I have a child and that child is a U.S. citizen because they're born in the United States, then at least that child has citizenship. We don't know what citizenship is going to be if we don't fix this. It could literally affect everybody because no one living is older going back to 1859. No one. So we have to fix this. And finally, voting rights could be revoked depending on your state law. And this too could affect everyone. Because if your voting rights are based upon your U.S. citizenship, then if there's no U.S. citizens, then does that mean they can just rig the election? It doesn't matter who votes. It doesn't matter. Because it's all make-believe. We're going through this political drama every 4 years when actually we could easily have a dictatorship. And nobody knows because we're taking the blue pill. All right. It's a critical moment. We must fix this. And I'm saying fix it now because America is facing a Black and Hispanic majority in the next 25 years. Knowledge is power. And when you can use knowledge as a tool or you can use it as a weapon. So when knowledge is used against you, it is a weapon. And here's how the weapon could be used. Blacks must push now to repair the invalidity of the Civil War amendments during this 400th anniversary of slavery in the British colony that became the United States. Otherwise, you risk white, Ku Klux Klan, Masonic, apartheid politicians and others using the invalidity of the Civil War amendments to maintain power even when whites become a minority. They could do that before they become a minority and then continue that reign of terror after they are a minority. You already have a conservative Supreme Court that could literally turn back the hands of time to 1859 before Lincoln and the Civil War. Just present them the same evidence that I presented to you. And the justices could say, you're right. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments are invalid. There goes immigration policy. It all is left up in the air. It could start another civil war. I'm saying if we push for reparations and repairing these amendments right now, we can prevent apartheid in the future. The future is the consequence of our decisions. So we must make a decision, and that decision can no longer be to do nothing. In summation, let me propose that H.R. 40 and its Senate companion bill both be amended to include reproposing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Since there's no statute of limitations or deadline, hey, Mississippi proved that. Since there's no deadline on doing it, we can do it again. We can vote again. And it should pass without a problem with a majority of both parties. Both political parties should pass both of these, all three of these amendments with no problem this time. Let's hope. All right. It is the 400th anniversary of slavery in the British colony that became America this year, 2019. I'm saying if we don't fix race, it will break us again as a nation, and this time around, we may not be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So we also have to look at this from a divine perspective, because I am one of the black Jews. I'm very familiar with the Torah, but this particular part of the Torah and Tanakh is also in the Bible, also in the Quran. And those people who don't believe in the Abrahamic religions do believe in karma and things of that sort. So what it says in Genesis 15 is that the children of Abraham would become slaves in a nation that is not theirs, and would be afflicted and enslaved for 400 years. But afterwards, that nation that did this to them would be judged, and they would come out with great substance. Great substance. All right. America, I love you. What is the judgment that you have looking at you this year? Some point this year, if you believe these scriptures, and I'm a believer. So there's the potential that the judgment could be divine or celestial. And that means that a nuclear devastating Carrington event, and talking about Carrington events in the sun would be a subject for another video, but a nuclear devastating Carrington event from the sun is already overdue by 10 years. 1859 was the last Carrington event. So if we risk having one right now, when we are a society based upon electricity and nuclear energy, and also we have nuclear weapons, if the same sort of thing happened now that happened in 1859, then that could be devastating on a nuclear basis, and also cause long-term blackouts of electricity. Scientists have found that America and the entire world, in fact, has a 1 in 8 chance of a Carrington event occurring before the year 2020. That's a 1 in 8 chance. When we are looking at all these other things affecting the environment, from the racial environment that we have going on, to our need to repair our nation, to this prophecy, to all the other things that are going on, even as far as climate change is concerned, we need to fix this. We need to face it and let God grace it. We need to address this hard conversation about reparations and the Civil War amendments. And we need to do it now to avert or mitigate the judgment that could be coming celestially and from the divine. So please vote for the truth that makes you free. I hope that that those people in Congress and the Senate and our other elected officials would actually vote to put in the true 14th Amendment, true liberation from slavery, true voting rights, true reparations. I hope that they will do that, so that I will be qualified to run for president next year, and then you can vote for me, Anita Belle, for your president, because I'm at least the one that's telling you the truth that will make you free. All right, thank you. God bless you. You can follow me on bellevision2020.com. Thank you.